Okay. Hi, I'm Alyssa Baum, President of the League of Women Voters of Scarsdale. As you know, the League is a nonpartisan political organization. We're nonpartisan in that we don't support or oppose any particular candidate for public office. We are partisan in that we take position on issues after informed debate and consensus. Today, we are joined by the school board and members of the district staff, Superintendent Thomas Hagerman, Assistant Superintendent Stuart Maddie, Eric Rauschenbach, Assistant Superintendent for Special Education and Student Services, Dr. Andrew Patrick, Assistant Superintendent for Human Resources and Leadership Development, Jerry Chrissy, Director of Instructional Technology and Innovation, and Dr. Edgar McIntosh, Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum. We also are joined by School Board Vice President Amber Youssef. And I don't have everyone else on my screen. So I will let the other board members introduce themselves if they can. There's only Amber.
Alyssa, can I just say, Karen
Yes.
Seske.
Alyssa, I'm not sure that.
Karen Seske wanted to send along her regrets. Unfortunately, she was not feeling well this morning, so she's not able to attend, but she wanted me to let all of you know that.
I'm so sorry to hear that. Please tell her that we want her to feel better soon. I'm now going to hand over the program to Susie Hahn, who is our portfolio chair for the school budget. She will run us through a series of questions. Afterward, the session, all members of the league are welcome to stay on to do our consensus meeting where we will establish our position on the budget. Thank you so much, Susie.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you, Alyssa. My name is Susie Hahn, and I'm so excited to be here with you all today to discuss the 2022-23 proposed school budget. Many thanks to all our speakers for making the time to join us here today and for inviting questions and input from the community regarding the proposed budget. Thank you in particular for all the hard work that went into answering our advanced questions to this meeting. I dropped that doc with the Q&A into the chat so people have it to refer to here. So for this information session, I'll be asking some questions based on those advanced questions, and then there will be an opportunity for Q&A afterwards. So without further ado, let's dive right in. We'll start with general and finance questions about the budget. So recently, Jeff Martin, longtime treasurer and budget book guru who is retiring this year, was quoted in the local press as having strong feelings about the tax cap. Stuart, do you have feelings about the tax cap? The first version of this year's budget was over, but then was reduced to fall under the tax cap. Some of the reductions were efficiencies and a recalculation of ERS, but over $500,000 was a reconsideration or deferment of new items. Do you think that staying under the tax cap is sustainable?
There are many variables that go into the budget, as we know. There are variables that we cannot control. Interest rates, ERS, TRS contributions, which are the pension contributions on behalf of all of our employees. Our health insurance plan, which is self-funded, which is a major driver to our budget, either to the positive or to the negative. And the number of retirements of our employees on any given year can help us or sort of hurt us depending on the year. And as I answered in that question, as those things sort of balance out, the tax cap becomes more sustainable or staying under it. However, if those things were to compound in any one given year particularly poorly, or year after year for a series of 2 or 3 years, it could be particularly challenging. And it's always a balance. The Board of Education negotiates contracts on behalf of all of our bargaining units. So there's a control factor there, but it's also, we are a team with all of our employees providing the best, program that we can. So that balance of all those things together really sort of drives where we would be relative to the tax cap. We don't budget to that, but we have to be aware of it. If we were to go above it, I would hope, there would be a lot of conversation beforehand as much as possible, sharing with the community and all the stakeholders the reasons why. And I would guess that would be a combination of some of those factors going again to the negative or poorly against us, and perhaps a lot of new initiatives that the district wants to take on that would sort of drive us above and beyond that tax cap.
Thank you.
Sure.
And the next question, thank you for the undesignated fund balance answer. I won't read through the whole thing, but I did think it was interesting that the resident income is a critical factor in determining the district's rating with the credit agencies. So do you speak to the Moody's analysts like quite regularly, or how does that go?
No, just as we go forward with the borrowing. So we have that interview with them when we get to that point. So we'll, Jeff Martin and I, along with our consultants, we'll be on a phone call with them for, 45 minutes or so, going through, the past year or two of audits, different trends in the district, from our business perspective, things that might be going on with the community. Of course, they have our full disclosure, which gives a lot of factual data to them in order for them to make their rating. But it's not a surprise to any of you. Scarsdale does have a very good reputation, and the resident income and full value, all of that is, very important in their consideration of where we end up with a credit rating.
Great, thank you. Next question. Can the Scarsdale Public School District invest any of its fund balance in the markets as private schools do? I've been told that the village has discussed possibly investing in treasuries, which is part of why I asked this question.
I believe that is on the table as an option. It's always a balance. Typically, the last number of years, it's been certificates of deposit, and rates are very low, or money markets. Money markets were for a while there getting a better return. Jeff has great relationships with our institutions and really negotiates and has them play against each other very well. So we're maximizing that. But, at the end of the day, we are limited by New York State, general municipal law and local finance law and educational law for what we can do as far as investments. I'm not sure about private schools. I would guess we're much more limited than what they have. Interest rates will be going up, which will be good on the revenue side. That's one good thing. So hopefully, I would think our revenue stream from interest, would increase a little bit for next year, or at least meet budget.
That's great. And it's awesome that you refinanced the debt before rates are rising further. So that's excellent. Yeah. Okay, great. So I'm going to skip a couple questions maybe and go to process and community engagement. Thank you for outlining these many ways that the board and school administration engage with the community on matters of the budget, as well as other issues. I think the number of questions answered is well over 100 now, which might be a record. So we appreciate that. For the election and school budget vote in May, I believe absentee ballots will again this year be accepted due to COVID. In an attempt to make voting as accessible as possible, would you be in favor of continuing this practice even after the pandemic is over? That might be an Amber question.
Thanks, Susie. And I just want to say thank you to the League for hosting this forum today. The board hasn't discussed at the table expanding opportunities for absentee voting, but I will say that, community engagement has been an important part of our board this year and in previous years. And we have seen that in the past few years, when absentee voting was readily available for the community, the number of people participating in our processes has gone up. So personally, that's something that I would support. But again, the board hasn't discussed this at the table. I'm not sure if we can change that law. Actually, I'm not sure that's something that we can do personally, but anything that supports community engagement, the board has generally been in favor of.
Okay, great. Thank you. In what other ways has the board been involved in matters of advocacy and engaging with the broader community? The board has liaisons to both the New York State School Board Association and the Westchester Putnam School Board Association. What recent issues have faced these organizations that might be of interest to Scarsdale?
Thanks, Susie. So as you noted, the board participates in NYSBA and Westchester Putnam School Board Association. We have liaisons to both of those organizations. Recently, this year in the fall, NYSBA presented us with a number of resolutions and amendments that the board discussed at the table and then voted on at their annual convention. And there were a wide variety of topics that were covered in there, and you saw some of our discussions. And more recently for NYSBA, there was the Area 10 Director position, which was the the group that we're involved in Scarsdale. And again, I think that was around in January where the board discussed the candidates and voted for them. And more locally, the board advocacy is one of our board goals. And more locally, the board recently made a statement regarding the proposed legislation for marijuana in terms of dispensaries. And so we took a stand on that. So it is an important part of our board goals.
Great, thank you. So on to the calendar, the budget calendar. This year's budget calendar was rescheduled and a bit different from previous years. At first, it didn't seem like a big deal to me, but I'm realizing that having just the 1 week between the last budget study session and the budget forum, as opposed to 2, is not insignificant. Would you consider returning to the schedule of previous years of having 2 weeks between the 3rd budget session and the forum? The additional time would allow for more detailed study and understanding of the budget and greater opportunity for discussion in the formation of a consensus statement.
We do have a draft budget calendar together for next year, and I think that it's similar to how it laid out this year, but I'm sure the Board of Education and we'll take that under consideration as we think about next year.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
So the next topic will be personnel, which is really the story of this year's budget. This year's proposed budget places a priority on increased staffing, primarily for mental and emotional needs of students. Could you speak to the increased mental health needs of students trending even before the COVID-19 pandemic? For those in the audience who missed the presentation, I can screen share a slide or two, Eric, if you don't mind highlighting this trend for our Zoomers.
Sure.
Okay.
You know, we did a special education presentation earlier this year, probably about 2 months ago at this point, really looking at kind of the last 10 years of trends. We have had an increase in social emotional needs. Thank you. Perfect slide, actually, over the last 10 years. And as you can see, both in terms of absolute numbers, we've gone up, and percentage changes have gone up in the areas of other health impairment and emotional disturbance or emotional disability. There has been an increase in, especially in suburban affluent areas, of anxiety, depression, and kids having a harder time dealing with all of the pressures that are put on them for performance in school, performance in extracurriculars, and that has shown in our classification rates. Most of those increases in anxiety and depression really fall in under the other health impairment classification, and you can see that's moved from about 100 kids in 2011 and 12 to 241 this current year. You know, I think that's the story of this. I think we have had a little bit larger year-to-year increase during the pandemic, and I think that is simply a magnifier of an already present trend. Prior to the pandemic, we had already started our emotional disabilities program in the high school. We had been in discussion about moving a similar program into the middle school and buttressing our social emotional interventions. And the pandemic has really shown that need even more greatly, so that this budget really goes a long way to addressing those increasing trends for students needing counseling and needing to have a little bit of extra support within schools.
There was a slide in the personnel presentation for this high school psychologist that I thought, really affected me actually. So I don't know if I wanted to share that as well.
Perfect. Yeah, I think those numbers speak for themselves. We've had, double-digit increases at least in the types of mandated counseling services and evaluations that we've had. The hospitalizations over the last 2 years, the percentage increase is quite alarming. We've had, I think the pandemic has taken students who were effectively being managed in a full-time regular school endeavor, but were some of our most needy individuals, and kind of pushed them over an edge in needing more intense intervention because of the increased time at home, the less socialization, and really a change in the very structure of how they live their days and lives. As we've come back to full-time education, we have seen a plateauing of that and some return, while staying at an elevated number, but some return to seeing new cases and new students coming in with increasing needs, which is a good sign that kids are starting to come back into the regular swing of things. But that doesn't mean that there isn't a lot of work to do post-pandemic.
Thank you. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing now. Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so next question. To meet this great need for mental health support, why did the schools choose to propose to hire the 2 social workers as school staff as opposed to utilizing SFCS or outsourcing the support?
Yeah, that's a great question. For 40 years, we've had a partnership with Scarsdale-Edgemont Family Counseling. There isn't a person on the administration who doesn't hope to see that program doing exactly what it's doing for another 40 years. We have that program started initially as a suicide prevention program. It's moved more globally into preventing risky behaviors, including substance abuse, relationship abuse, and suicide, its original thought. Over the past few years, this trend has caused us more and more to what I would call infringe upon that original goal and ask our Scarsdale-Edgemont Family Counseling social workers or youth outreach workers to take on more of the mandated caseload. The goal of the Scarsdale-Edgemont Family Counseling Program and the Youth Services Program has really been to provide an initial level of prevention and intervention for students and address little problems before they become medium-sized problems and big problems. Unfortunately, in the last few years, we've had to utilize them more in those medium-sized and large problems. And I think that has only led to kind of us having more students need intervention. This is really a reset to allow the Youth Services Project to do their own work while bringing in an expansion of our mental health team, expanding their view. We also have some very specific job requirements on the full-time social worker piece, which is we do want to replace the outsourced service that we're using called BASIS, which is before and after school intervention services for students that are having difficulty coming to school, and have those social workers be able to engage students prior to coming to school in order to help them kind of make that transition from home to school, and then ultimately help families in the afternoon. The YSP does a great job in engaging our parents and parent groups. Unfortunately, the parents who need the type of intervention I just talked about are not those parents who are in those parent groups. And we really need someone to reach out on an individual family basis. We are also looking to have social workers really become ingrained in our internal structures so that they can focus on collaborating with our psychologists, our teachers, and provide kind of career-long intervention in our school team.
Thank you. So the next set of proposed hires have to do with academics. There's going to be a new next-gen math program in the elementary school. So I was wondering, I don't know if maybe Edgar wants to talk about it or Drew wants to talk about it from the hiring side or for the curriculum side about about the Next Gen Math program and the hire that's being
Sure, I'd be happy to talk about it. And the question was, I think after the 2-year implementation for the teacher on special assignment in math, what would happen to that position? And our vision for it was we want to make sure to support the new math program at the elementary level with the appropriate level of coaching. And we, at this current point, we have just one math instructional coach. So what we are looking to do is move a classroom teacher, an existing Scarsdale classroom teacher with math expertise and passion into a role where they could be working with Nancy and with our consultant through Metamorphosis on some real boots on the ground support for the teachers as we roll out this math program in the next 2 years. Now, we're anticipating now that having that extra person there to help support classroom teachers and the cohesion across the 5 elementary schools will be enough. And then at that point, that teacher would be shifting back into his or her classroom. And it is a temporary teacher on special assignment, and it really is responsive to the needs of this new math program being rolled out. Anything else to add, Drew? I think
I mean, the
the
only thing I
why.
would add is it's also a great opportunity to build leadership skills, teacher leadership skills in the person who will be coming out of the classroom, which then translate back into the building when that person returns after the second year. It's just a nice model.
Okay, great.
Absolutely. And through the process of making the choice for the math program, there's been a very rigorous process that started with the math committee and the vetting of a variety of different math programs. And now we have 43 teachers across the district, across the schools, piloting those 4 programs. And from this, a lot of math enthusiasm and leadership has really come to the surface. So I'm very excited to choose somebody within our ranks with a small committee to put in that position for that leadership opportunity.
Great, thank you. There is also a 6th grade computer technology hire being proposed. I don't know if well, maybe Jerry wants to talk to that a little bit, or maybe Edgar, if it's a curriculum change.
I'll let Jerry get us started.
Thank you, Susie. Yes, this is a position that actually we've had kind of brewing for a couple of years. It's never really made it into the budget until this year, the final budget. So we're very excited about it for 2 reasons. One is that we know in the building we really need the position. And the second thing is that we recently had parent focus groups to help prepare us for the technology plan. And one of the themes that came up over and over again was a desire to see more coding opportunities in the middle school specifically. Just to put it in numbers, if we did not add this position in for next year, students would have a quarterly of a technology quarterly in 6th grade, where they would have an experience that happens every other day. With the addition of this teacher now, it'll allow us to have students in class with this quarterly experience every day, so 5 days a week. We're excited because it allows us to do 2 things in terms of the curriculum. It helps us to develop a more robust coding curriculum so that students can really get deeper into the knowledge of coding that they're currently doing. Right now in that program, they're using Scratch, which is a block-based coding environment that emerges from really the work they do in elementary school. And this will allow the new teacher to begin a transition to more text-based codings as well later on in the class. The other thing it allows us to do is provide more individualization to students. As you can imagine, having a coding class every other day doesn't really lend itself to having the students who are at the highest level and the students who are more at the beginning level have individual support. And we're hoping that by having this experience, it'll allow the teacher in that role to provide a much more individualized experience to those students who who are enthusiastic about this, and also those who just want to learn more about coding.
Great, thank you. So to talk about operational proposed hires, this one didn't make it to the final version of the budget, but there was originally proposed an additional cleaner, I believe at the high school level. And thank you, Stuart, for your detailed explanation about the different levels of cleanliness in our schools. I was wondering, is the determination of the level a straight cleaner to square foot calculation, or is there like more to it than that? Is there like an entity that does inspections or certifications, or like, is it just a calculation about, people to square foot?
Yeah, I mean, that's only one measure of that. And I think it's a good place to start because, one person can only do so much. And then it's in balance with what else might be happening in that space. Post-pandemic, pre-pandemic, our buildings are, they're used a lot, not only by our programs, but after school activities, things are going on in the evenings or even preschool activities. So there's a lot going on and a lot of strain on our cleaning staffs for setups and all of that. So it's just one measure. Getting to level 2 on our elementary buildings, if you do it strictly on a square footage, we're not there.
You're not there. Yeah, that's why I was a little
Right.
confused. Yeah.
So, but utilizing the new cleaning product, the Viking Pure, which we instituted last year, and some new methodologies has allowed us to get us there for all student spaces in that building, which is great. Middle school, high school, we're not there because it's, we're too far away from that square footage where they can't quite do that. So as I mentioned in the answer to the question, we're going to be looking to that in the future. And as far as measuring it, it's really our internal team that does that. We do that through communication. We're fortunate we not only have a facilities director, but we also have 2 assistant facilities directors. They're able to get out into the buildings and really talk to the head custodians and do those visuals and talking to staff on the ground and the principals and all of that for the feedback. I would say one of the first things I noticed when I began here, almost 8 years ago, was it wasn't, a lot of the spaces didn't meet the eye test to me. So it was an area, that I wanted to focus on and work with our teams to bring up that level.
All right, great. Thank you. So for Drew, thank you for the insight into what the hiring environment looks like this year for our staff. For other senior administrative searches, what could that look like in terms of the budget? Given the scope of the search, a search firm to help recruit our next superintendent might be a significant cost. Is that expense earmarked anywhere in the budget?
So I'll actually defer to Stuart and Amber on that one, if you're specifically asking about the superintendent search costs.
And so as far as the cost itself, we have, there's money built into not only this year's budget as a projection of actual, depending on when we engage in that activity. We would encumber those funds with an open purchase order and carry that over, with that engagement. And I can't speak for the Board of Education as far as timing, but certainly from the public sessions, from what I know of, it sounds like we're getting there pretty quickly. So that would be the case.
And just to follow up that, yes, the board is being very thoughtful about, as we put together the RFP, we're mindful about fees and trying to be as complete as possible with the RFP. So when we go out and we receive proposals, that we'll have a good understanding of what our costs will be before we commit to anything.
Great, thank you. And what else? About other staff hiring. It looks like it's pretty comparable to past years in terms of the amount of interest that we're getting for recruiting. Would you say that you've had to look at other methods of hiring, different avenues, or maybe to reach a more diverse audience, candidate pool? Or
So, yeah, I can speak to a couple things on that front. One is the system that's used throughout New York State called the Online Application System, OLAS or OLAS, as we refer to it, really is the industry standard in this region. And most people who are entering the profession or who have been in the profession in this region are well aware of that recruitment tool. And it has a number of automated features that individual applicants can turn on in order to let themselves be notified when vacancies occur. We also use an internal platform that ensures that all of our postings make it to EdWeek, which is our trade publication. So that's been happening for a number of years, but a site called topschooljobs.org that anybody can visit. Our positions appear there for usually a 30-day period of time. With special positions that have active networks, either regionally or nationally, we do try to recruit through those vehicles. So we have some performing arts vacancies, and we use trade websites and networks of educator networks to direct people to OLAS when we have those vacancies. The American Library Association when we have library vacancies. And then of course with our technology leadership positions, we go to those ISTE and other organizations in a posting site called EdSurge that lots of technology people know about and go to. So we do try to diversify our recruitment avenues as best we can. And if anyone has children in college, you might be aware of a network called Handshake. It's a widely used platform at the college and university level to help undergraduates and graduate students become aware of positions in all fields. And we do use that as well because it has a reach to not just current collegiate individuals, but also to alumni networks. So we try to take a broad approach.
Thank you. Okay, so moving right along, going to the next topic of special education. Thank you, Eric, for your presentation on special education at the January 24th Board of Ed meeting. It provided much insight into the different ways we look to support all our students and keep as many of our special students in district as possible. Regarding the ICT classes, you mentioned that there look to be 2 or 3 sections entering K this fall, which is consistent with the plateauing of classified students you mentioned in your presentation. I noticed there was no special ed staffing contingency for the first time in a while. You also mentioned that the ICT classes by grade will be split across 2 schools each year moving forward, and that 4 schools will be utilized for ICT in rotation rather than 2. From a budget perspective, what will that look like? Could that result maybe in transportation savings? Would expanding to 4 schools require additional resources versus 2, whether staffing or otherwise? Do you anticipate there to be capital project improvements necessary in the smaller elementary schools to adequately accommodate ICT classes and the related support systems?
No, that's a great question. Thank you. So just let me take a second to explain kind of what we're moving from and to, just so everyone has an understanding of that. Over the past number of years, Quaker Ridge has received the kindergarten ICTs every other year. And as Green Acres came online after its renovation, the plan was to do that similarly every other year, and then have each year the ICTK go from one school to the next in order to allow for better professional development of ICT teachers, maintenance of pairs, building of school culture, and a whole number of other things that are really beneficial to having a static program in those schools. Since we've moved to having 3 and sometimes 4 sections on each grade level, that has become a draw on some of those school resources, and the need to use consultancy for speech and language, OT and PT has become just a little bit of a nightmare to schedule. And we've also run into some space constraints, although each individual section of ICT, because it is included for most of the day, does not require a huge amount of extra space. When you start multiplying the sections of ICT, all those little bit of need adds up to a larger need. So we're going to move to a 4-school program, which will so Fox Meadow and Quaker Ridge, and then Green Acres and Heathcote will be paired, and every other year they will receive at least one section of ICT each. If there's a third section overall, that will go to the school that has the least overall ICT sections in it, and then the fourth will go to the other section, if there is one. This year, like I said, it looks like they're between 2 and 3 sections. So we have 3 rolling off into the middle school now. So we'll be able to cover that with the existing FTEs in the ICT program. As far as budget difference from a 2-school to the 4-school solution, we don't anticipate a huge difference. I think we will gain some efficiencies when it comes to busing. I think we'll gain some efficiencies, especially in the early years where existing school related professionals can take on the one section that enters into a Fox Meadow without having to use consultants. But I think overall it'll be a fairly small change, if any, between the 2 and the 4-school solution. And just want to let everybody know, Edgewood is not being left out. They are going to be starting, we're expanding our 8-to-1 to 2 program there. So all of our schools will have important programs on the special education front, which I think is really important from a culture and equity standpoint.
Great. Thank you, Eric. Okay, so capital projects next. But as far as capital projects go, there doesn't seem to be much to discuss, as the buildings condition survey isn't out yet, and the proposed budget is pretty lean at less than, I think, 0.6% of the budget allocated to capital projects. The high school auditorium will be funded by the 2018 surplus and the 2023-24 budget. Is there anything, Stuart, you would want to?
Well, I'd like to clarify that, that will be, my recommendation as we stand now for the high school auditorium. Of course, there cannot be any promises.
You can't commit future
I
budgets.
can't speak for the cabinet. I can't speak for the superintendent. I can't speak for the board, and I can't speak for, district residents that will eventually vote on the budget. But, we are working, we have a committee that's been working for quite a while. We're going to be growing that committee. We are starting to do that now, and starting with some outreach to fine tune the scope of the high school auditorium. It's grown a little bit over the years as we've changed individuals and have had a better understanding of that space and how it works with all the different users of that space. And we're hoping to make it a very complete and project that the whole community can be proud of, just not the high school. And so we're going to be working on that, and then keeping everyone up to date on the progress on that. We are working on a timeline just yesterday to, as far as communication. Certainly, as we come back in the early fall, we'll be having a presentation for the board and community to give an update on that, and perhaps even have some renderings and things like that, so it doesn't come as a surprise when we come back for a budget season in January and February. But that'll be the goal of that. The 2018 bond projects are finishing up this summer, so that's exciting. It's been a lot of work that we've gotten done over the last 3 or 4 years, highlighted by Green Acres. And then planning for that next bond, all things being equal, with dovetailing into expiring debt service, would start the plans for that in fall of 23.
Thank you. Under facilities and operations, rising energy costs and utility costs was a major driver in this year's expenses and worked into next year's budget. I guess now we don't call it COVID contingencies, we call them like inflation or other risky or contingencies. Are schools treated the same by the energy and utility companies as private citizens are, or are there different laws and regulations that apply to schools?
That's a great question. Yes, and it's a little bit different in Westchester as well. In other areas of the state, we were afforded a little more bargaining power for school districts and municipalities than we do down here with Con Ed. We're sort of locked in a little bit more, and more of a reactionary as far as switching from gas to oil during certain heating periods, and their rate structure. So that's unfortunate, but we're in the same basket as everyone else. So it's definitely driving our costs, especially this year. It's compounded, not only by the energy costs going up, but our energy use related to COVID mitigation strategies. So it's been great. We're opening windows, but we're also throwing a lot of heat out the windows as well. And we're running our systems, a lot longer and a lot harder. So as we get, post-pandemic, some of those, though keeping some of those strategies in place, we'll be easing off a little bit. Which will help, and then hopefully the costs come down as well. And that it does highlight the need to continue to look at different energy efficiencies and sustainable type of improvements as well that we need to continue to be aggressive at looking at.
Thank you. As far as safety goes, it's been a while, so I don't remember exactly. What would the phase 2 window mitigation project as outlined by Alteris involve?
So
being not in this year's budget, but potentially in the future.
Sure. We don't. So for obvious reasons, we don't share specifically what each phase of the window mitigation covers. What I will tell you is that basically we had our security consultants identify 3 levels of priority for the windows that are most vulnerable in these types of incidents. And the most vulnerable and top priority windows have already indoors have been addressed in the first phase of mitigation, which was completed a couple of years ago. The second phase really takes it to that secondary area of priority.
Okay. I don't know if I can ask this, is there a ballpark number, like in terms of budget, like what we're looking at it costing, or is that also kind of?
There is. Stuart, do you remember it off the top of your head, or I have to run back into my documents?
Oh, it's okay.
I don't remember off the top of my head.
You can ask your next question. I'll put it in the chat when I find it.
Thank you. Or I can get it later. Thank you. Food service. Has the food service contract bidding process been completed? Or is there an update? Do you expect food service to return to be self-funding in the fall?
Yes, I did provide an update the last, not the last board meeting before that, where the last couple of years, we've been allowed to enter in a 1-year emergency contract with the current vendor that's per New York State. So although we started working on specs for a new bid, 2 years ago, we have never actually put those into place. And the New York State has once again allowed the 1-year emergency contract into next year. So it was my recommendation, and we will be doing that. The great thing about that is we continue our very good relationship with Chartwells, who we've been with for many years, but I would say most recently, especially with the addition of the elementary buildings, they have been extremely responsive and very much a team member. So sort of why not continue that as long as we can. So we will be doing that. And at the same time, those specs that our food service committee has worked on are basically in place since last year. And then as we turn into next year, I actually had a meeting with Tara Cook yesterday, who leads up our food service program, as far as plans for, opening of the elementaries with our hot meals starting in September. So that's exciting, and we'll be ready to roll. The challenge, of course, will still be, getting employees, but we're starting to work on that already, bringing them on maybe a little bit sooner to train them. So they're ready to go in the fall, but that will be our intention. And as far as getting back to self-sustaining, that will certainly be the goal. We're actually running self-sustaining now, but that's partly due to not having all of our food service workers at elementary buildings. So we're saving on the staffing costs on that equation.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
cooperative agreements with the village were listed under budget efficiencies. Could you elaborate on the nature of these school partnerships with the village and or any other local or state organizations, possibly regarding traffic and safety, cellular signal improvements, and or COVID response?
I would say a lot of those are prospective. The ones that are in place that are, that impact, operationally are certainly at the maintenance garage and our busing facility, where we're saving, taxpayer dollars by sharing, mechanics and facilities up in those spaces. And if you recall, a number of years ago, we were able to expand our bus compound. Instead of squeezing all of our buses into a very tiny little parking spot, we were able to work with the village and expand that to make it a much safer, much more efficient space. Certainly with our trash removal, where the village works with or provides that service, which is huge savings to the school district. And in turn, the school district providing our buildings for summer recreation. For all of our community members are, I think, two of the big ones from the operational side.
Great. That sounds wonderful. Thank you.
Susie, the phase two, the quote we got, and I believe it's about a year old, so not taking into account any increase due to inflation, was between $275,000 and $300,000.
Great. Thank you so much. Okay. So technology. A new technology plan has been recently completed. And Jerry, you said that it will recommend a hardware investment of $1.6 million in next year's budget. Of course, wow, that's a big number. What can you tell us about that? I think you had mentioned that we're going to be doing the one-to-one devices in the high school, expanding to that. What else is in there? I get the breaking news, like what's in the
Sure. I wish the technology plan was done. It will be done very soon, though. The community will be seeing it at the April 25th board meeting. And it's really two technology plans. There's a state technology plan, which is more like a survey. Then there's a local Scarsdale technology plan, which goes into much more detail than the state would have us give. But it really will provide the direction for technology use in the district for the next 3 years. To put the $1.6 million number in perspective, we've had a technology budget for hardware every year of $1.55 million. So we're fortunate to enjoy the board's support and the community support for having that funding. And next year, we're recommending a $50,000 increase to bring it up to 1.6, because frankly, we see a lot of costs going up in terms of the supply chain and inflation. The budget was actually supposed to go up to 1.6 million for this current school year. But when we looked at our projected costs and recovery from the pandemic, we decided to just kind of hold a line on the budget. We only want to increase it when it's necessary. But based on some of the costs we've seen coming in so far, even this year, we wanted to just be safe for next year and bring it up to that 1.6. And then going, in future years, it may actually come back down again to 1.55 to where it is now. In terms of the programs that will be offered, we are going to continue the one-to-one program, which we started now in kindergarten through 9th grade this year. Next year, we're going to roll it out to 10th grade. And then the idea is that over the course of each year, we'll go up until the senior year of high school. I will say that even if a student is in a grade that doesn't have a one-to-one program, so if you have a child who's a junior, we have enough Chromebooks available in our stock where they can actually go and sign one out for the year and in fact make their own one-to-one program. But what we want to observe is to see when the transition happens between the district providing devices and students getting their own devices. So we think that, as we move forward, we see a lot of device requests at the 9th grade level. We're getting some inkling that maybe as students become seniors, that parents go out and buy a device for their child that they take with them to college. And so we may not have to buy, 380 devices for our seniors during that year because students may already have their own device. But certainly the continuation of the one-to-one program, the replacement of devices in districts. Right now we have a 4-year replacement cycle. So any device that's older than 4 years goes to be recycled, and we actually get funding back from the recycler. and also other program related expenses related to some program expansion. So for example, at the high school music department, we're expanding our offerings in digital music composition. So we just redid the lab there. Lisa Forte did some work in terms of renovating that space, and we're looking forward to expand the number of devices in that room because we can anticipate more students taking those courses. So basically that is a breakdown of the funding. You will see on the technology plan, we'll do a 3-year projection for that funding. And more importantly, you'll see, I think, the curriculum that we have planned. I'll give you, since you asked for a little bit of inside information, I'll tell you what we're going to be sharing in the technology plan, just 3 things. One is that one of the initiatives we have moving forward is an initiative involving teaching media literacy to all high school seniors. This was identified by the community and also identified internally as something very important. It's part of a CFI grant this year. The second initiative that we heard about from the parents is taking a look at student wellness and screen time and balancing those. So we're going to be talking about that. And the third one I'll be discussing that came from the parents is parents requested more clarity and communication around the different technology offerings that we have in the district. So as parents, they understand kind of what the K-12 pathway is. So for example, we'll have a lot of information about the new 6th grade coding position and what that means for students. And in addition, parents expressed a desire to know more about the high school offerings that we have, feeling that the course descriptions or the course titles didn't necessarily reflect, what the students were offered, or giving students an idea of what those course offerings would be. So the 3 things that you'll hear is, I'm giving you the preview now, will be media literacy, digital health, and a more clear communication avenues for parents.
Great, thank you. Thank you for the scoop.
Don't spread it outside of this.
It stays in this room. Okay, great. Thank you. For curriculum, thank you, Edgar, for outlining the various assessments used in our schools to benchmark student learning.
Sure.
Eric had mentioned in his presentation a COVID bump in classifications as some students needed more support during the pandemic, which I took to mean academic, but maybe I'm wrong, which is why I was curious. What does the program improvement structure look like? Is that like a...
Sure. I can tell you about it. Program improvement is a structure we have that dedicates funds towards looking at the curriculum every single summer and making adaptations to it and enrichments to it based on student need. So we bring in groups of teachers to look across the curriculum, and based on what we're seeing as far as academic trends, we make adaptations to that curriculum. So that is a structure that's been ongoing. It's been used for innovation. It's been used for integration. What we're seeing, part of what we're seeing, I know that there's been a mental health bump, but some of you might not be surprised to know that we see that some students are struggling with executive functioning. While there are lots of opportunities for them to do independent projects during COVID and that type of thing, we also saw students who were really struggling with that. So we're looking to make sure that we're providing opportunities for project-based learning so that students can have the practice in a way that aligns with the standards in doing projects with their teachers. So that is also going to be something that we're going to be looking at. And then performance-based assessments, in which we're not just evaluating the content that students are learning, because our students did tend to get to know the facts and the skills that they needed. But we also want to be able to assess the executive functioning and how they're doing as far as independence, and performance-based assessments get to that better than your traditional paper and pencil. So we're very happy to have that and that structure, and it is something that's responsive, and it changes year to year based on the needs of the students.
Just to piggyback on Edgar, there is a special ed and student services component using those program improvement days as well. The focus this year is on expanding the MTSS toolkit or the RTI toolkit, because we are seeing coming out of the pandemic, a wider range of students who need some differentiation, who don't fall into the disability category necessarily, but fall into the, a gap here or there, given whatever their experience was over the last few years, and how to, give teachers in the MTSS committees the tools to address those, along with looking at special education and how to tweak those programs on a regular basis. But this year, certainly in light of what we saw post-pandemic and what kids' needs are.
Yeah, thank you for saying that, Eric. The subject of the last educational report really, we touched on a few of the strategic goals, but we focused mainly on this structure of MTSS, in which we make sure that students are moving, at grade level, and students who are struggling are afforded the best research-based strategies. And so that is something that's ongoing, and it's also helping us to identify trends, academic, social, emotional, behavioral.
Wonderful. Thank you. Okay, next topic. Thank you for conducting a survey recently to get input on the AT program in the high school. Have the results of that survey been shared? And I was wondering who filled out the survey. Was it parents and current students of the program? I think years ago, before COVID, when the evaluation of AT was first being discussed, I believe it was suggested that high school alumni would be surveyed as well. I don't know if that's feasible or if that's something to consider.
It's actually happened where we have surveyed high school alumni. And part of what happened with the AT review this year is that there were focus groups that were brought together where the focus was on really bringing in the most recent graduates, because we were looking at the current AT programs and asking them some essential questions around critical thinking and how the AT compared to what they saw that their peers had experienced through AP. That report is fresh, hot off the presses. So we have an opportunity to look through that. And I am going to be sharing the stage with Jerry at the April Education Board. He's also going to be sharing it with Ken Benamo and Chris Welsh, who partnered with me on inviting in the Tri-State Consortium for that thorough 3-day consultancy that didn't just involve discussions with various stakeholders, but a real deep dive into the curriculum, the coursework, the rationale behind it, the data that we found, so that they can give us the most informed recommendations going forward. And those recommendations are going to be contextualized at the April Educational Report at the same time as, not at the same time, either before or after. Jerry and I are still arguing about the order of it, the technology report. So that's also good. We're also going to be talking about the AT report and bringing that to the community.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And the last section I had here was about COVID, but I don't want to talk about COVID anymore. I don't know if
neither do we.
Yeah.
If maybe Stuart, you would just want to make a comment about, the contingency plan for next year, that we're not calling it COVID, but what we might have in plan.
Sure. Much like this current school year, we thought it prudent to designate funds if needed in next year's budget for any COVID contingency. And I've sort of changed that a little bit to say inflation contingency, as well as we're seeing a lot of changes, most notably what we talked about previously, fuel and oil and all of that. Expenses this year, we have utilized those funds most notably for tutoring cost and substitute teacher costs, and some other PPE type expenses. So that money is there if needed. We're not taxing for that budget item. So if we don't need it, it gets returned to fund balance, which is good. But we felt like this would be the most transparent way of recognizing that these still may occur without doing a permanent tax on it, if you will.
Okay, great. Thank you. Well, I took about an hour now, so I should probably stop now. I don't know if anyone has a question that they would want to ask that I missed.
I will put us back on gallery view so we can see everyone. So are there questions in the audience? Speak up. Diane.
So my question is about adding staff that would be a recurring expense. And I was hoping to get a bit of a quick overview of what that means long-term planning in terms of what the district can and can't do when you create new positions that didn't exist and aren't being created in relation to expanding enrollment. So for example, the addition of the social workers, is that those are tenure track positions, the occasional add-on for the math learning teacher position, the addition of cleaners, which are a completely different type of position. These are recurring costs that get added onto the budget. What happens if the need changes and we don't necessarily need all of those positions, or we need different types of positions?
Yeah, thank you, Diane. I'll take this one. So certainly the board has the right to eliminate positions at any time if the need's not there. They're not compelled to maintain a position that's been created in perpetuity. There's just nothing that would require that. Where it gets a little more complicated is determining who the individual is that would be let go or laid off should a downsizing or a reduction in force occur. That gets into specific labor law related to seniority. So both the certified staff and classified through the civil service staff have rules related to seniority. On the certified side, teachers, administrators, counselors, psychologists, all of those folks, those seniority rules are tied to the tenure area in which they're appointed. So you might be familiar with the phrase LIFO, last in, first out. That is generally the rule that you would encounter once someone has achieved tenure. They're protected from they're protected by due process, but tenure does not necessarily protect an employee from downsizing. Does that answer your question?
Yes, and what about the positions that are not tenure track, and what kind of rules apply to them?
Yeah, like I was saying, civil service also has seniority-based rules. And then, of course, we do have individual contracts that may have particular components to them, but none of them would supersede the civil service or the certified laws that are in place about seniority.
And I would also add, Drew, it's incumbent upon, the administration to, and we do this part of our budget review process, is to look at staffing, when there's an ask or to review what we have in place to see if that still makes sense. I mean, those are more difficult conversations because it's more difficult to take away than, hey, let's add because you're excited about, something new. But, we do have those conversations, and we do press, that type of conversation and that discussion during our budget process.
And really, Stuart, just thank you for saying that. And just to build on that a little bit, like one of the most concrete examples that I think we can give is our elementary staffing. So we run the number of classroom sections across our 5 elementary schools that we need based on our enrollment guidelines. So we grow and shrink our elementary staffing every single year, depending on the enrollment and how many students are integrated in a specific building. And sometimes that causes an increase in staffing because we break sections. Sometimes that causes a decrease in staffing because sections collapse.
Thank you so much. Does anyone else have a question?
I think Myra has her hand raised.
Okay, Myra, and then after Myra, Debbie.
Hi, good morning. This is a question just for me as an individual. Obviously, there's been a lot of discussion in the last couple of months about the staffing, and thanks so much, Stuart, for all your work on that. Has there been a bit of an analysis as to the advantage of having in-house mental health resources vis-a-vis, dealing with third parties, not just what that might do to our budget, but perhaps other kinds of advantages that there can be between in-house resources and outsourcing? Thank you.
Yeah, I can address that, Myra. There has been, when we look at long-term mental health providers within a school district, we have the great advantage and opportunity as a school district that provides a competitive salary with excellent benefits to bringing in clinicians who tend to stay for their careers. We go through a very rigorous tenure process that really provides us with stalwart and steady clinical intervention for students that get to know students over long periods of time, that get to know the staff over long periods of time, and become thought partners in our organization. In dealing with our most need-intensive families, that's extremely important. And it sometimes really does make the difference between helping a student and a family move through a crisis because they've have a relationship before the crisis, they've dealt during the crisis, and then there's an aftercare portion to it that remains in place. So yeah, when we're talking about other types of interventions, whether it's being in classrooms doing social emotional groups for student or lessons for students, when we're talking about doing preventative work, being an open ear and an outreach for students that don't need mandated ongoing long-term counseling, those are perfect examples of places where counselors who or related service providers who we're contracting with, which may be with us for a certain amount of time and leave, are extremely effective. So.
And I would like to jump into that a little bit too. If we're looking at other type of contractual type services, if we're looking at cleaning and all of that, and I've been in places that have had contracted cleaning. And first and foremost, union contracts sort of define union work, so that's very challenging to get around that once you have that established. But what I find here in places that have their employees, what I call a higher level of care. Right? You have employees, they care about where they are, who they're working for, the team that they work on. And it's evident in all of their daily habits and the way they treat people and all of that. And, if there's a little bit of a savings, contractually, I can guarantee you it's not typically worth it.
I think we really benefit, like a concrete example of how we benefited from that is in our transportation team. You may have seen news coverage near the start of the year, or even in several months into the year, where a lot of places in New York and the Northeast and around the country were struggling to find employees to run buses, to drive buses. Our board stayed supportive of our transportation team through COVID, and our transportation team stood up and was ready to go when we were back to transporting kids every day. So that was really, well, it was a relief from our standpoint to have that dedicated group, with smiles behind their masks, but welcoming kids onto the buses every day.
Thank you so much. Debbie, you had a question?
Yes. Hi, thank you. I know that Susie like generally covered the question on the booster organizations. But the question was more focused on future. I was just wondering how much and the most recent of influx of funds from the specific booster organizations, especially the Scarsdale Schools Foundation. What were some of the projects? Were there any in this year's budget, last year's? What's the trend been and in amounts and projects? And
Yeah.
if I may, before just a personal comment, Jerry Creasy, I think my kids were in elementary school when you were hired, and I remember you so fondly at Quaker Ridge. So lots of luck to you. I just needed to say that.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
So Debbie, I'll take a stab at that. It's been tricky over the last 2 years because parents have not been in the buildings necessarily. I've not had the same kind of partnerships around giving gifts. There have been some low-level stuff that has been coordinated between the individual principals and their PTAs. In terms of the Education Foundation, very specifically, they did not. There was nothing in the budget for this year. There was no big project. And they've just been a little bit of hands-off this year. Last year, they did help us with technology related to COVID. Which was really important for us to be able to, provide the most robust technology we could for our teachers who were teaching remotely or in hybrid models. And so, we look forward to kind of moving back there. You may or may not recall a couple of years ago, the board went through a process of trying to track and standardize isn't the right word, but be thoughtful and mindful about potential inequities that might develop by giving in certain kinds of schools or certain circumstances and not in other places. That sort of also extended to the foundation and other groups to make sure that gifts were as distributed as broadly as possible. So, we will look forward to kind of moving back into that normal partnership over time. I do know that the PTAs have been, in some cases, sitting on, expected gifts for a couple of years until we return back more towards normalcy. I know I just had a conversation yesterday with the Fox Meadow PTA about a potential gift that they're looking to give. So, a long-winded way of saying we hope to get back on track with our normal practices as we move into next year.
Thank you.
Okay, is there any other question? Okay, I do just want to clarify one thing about absentee ballots while we're here. That is actually a state constitution issue, and it limits voting by absentee if you're out of your polling place or you're disabled in some way and can't vote. There was an amendment to the Constitution which failed, which would have allowed no excuse absentee voting, but the league still supports this measure. So everyone here as individuals, as a school board, as a school district, you can still advocate to our legislators to try again. So had to get that plug. Are there any other questions? I don't see anyone. Well, I do want to thank everyone who's here, school board, school district members. You had a very short turnaround time, but you fully answered our questions in writing. You've been so gracious in being here today and really answering thoughtful, detailed questions. And we're so glad to have you. And we appreciate your time and look forward to seeing you.
Thank you so
Thank you
much.
so much for this opportunity. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Awesome.